And he points out two groups that really have a hard time with this. First of all, the Jews, he says, that for them, he says this image of the cross, he says, is verse 22, they demand miraculous signs, he says, and then verse 23, he says it's a stumbling block to the Jews. Well, think about it. The whole life of the Jews has been about rules and have been about obeying. If you behave these laws and you do these things, that you move up in status, in religious status, and you earn the favor of God, and therefore you are right in God's eyes. That's the way that they live their life. So the thought of a grace-filled God that says it's not about your behavior totally flips that. What's even worse is that they believed in a Messiah that was going to come, that was going to be kind of like their shining knight who's going to march into Jerusalem, and he's going to restore Israel into the place of its worthy honor, and then he's going to eliminate all of the oppression that's been under the Roman culture and stuff like that, and he's going to save us. As a warrior, he's going to save us. Not on a cross. In fact, for them, the cross was a symbol that Jesus was validated, the fact that he was being punished by God. Deuteronomy 21, 22 through 23 says this: if a man guilty of a capital offense is put to death and his body is hung on a tree or cross, he says, you must not leave his body on the tree overnight. Be sure to bury him that same day, because anyone who is hung on a tree is under God's curse. You mean to tell me as a Jew that the God that I have lived all my generations to is the same God who hung on that tree that says it's a curse, and that I have to believe in him to be saved? That's crazy. That's what the Jews thought. But not even the Jews, he says. He says the Greeks too. He says the Greeks, or the Gentiles as well, the non-religious people. He says the Greeks, they seek wisdom. He says for them, they're looking for something different. For a Greek, the cross was just as foolish, because they believed in gods, of course, that possessed power. If you were going into there, they had all these temples of the gods. They always talked about it. They were intellectuals. They were always arguing in philosophy. They were thinking about the culture, but they also recognized these gods, and gods had power, various degrees of power. And based on the degree of power, they were in a different social status as far as God's social status. And so they were higher up based on that particular, or the level of power that they had. A God would never choose to come and die for humanity, for people as low as human beings. That goes totally against what a God would do. A God is a God who demands your respect, demands your allegiance, demands your devotion. He's one who lifts himself up to a higher place. For you to say to me that some crucified Jew in some far corner of this God-forsaken world is the God of this universe, who's the King of all kings, who decides to come as some infant baby carpenter kind of bastard child person and die on the cross so that I could save and be in heaven with gods, all the gods forever? What are you smoking? That's what they would say. There is no way that I can believe in my intellectual mind that I could ever believe that that's the way a God would plan to be able to bring about salvation. And then on top of it, you tell me that this God says, look it, I'm giving this to you free, grace. I mean, it's not free, it cost me in my life, but I'm giving it to you, and you just need to believe. This is not anything you got to earn. This is not anything you got to work for. This is not anything you got to aspire to. This is not what we think, where if you do good enough, I might give it to you. This is free for the taking. No way. That's what they would say. And let's be honest, isn't that where we kind of are a lot of times in our life? We live in a world today where we think about it, we hear the story of this Christ crucified, and we think, I don't get it. I'm my own person. I earn my way just like everybody else. I mean, people need to earn their way. I live my life right. I'm not as bad as that person over there. I can't imagine God not saying, look, you're in, man, because you are better than him. I'm a good person. How can that not make sense? That almost seems like a person who's a needy person with a crutch, that they have to give up the effort on their own and say, I need God to, I need a Savior. I can't, it's like whiny. I need Jesus. Because we want to believe, no, it's up to us. It's not up to, we have to be able to do it. We certainly have to abide by the rules if we're going to do it. We can't, I can't believe in a God who continually allows people to make mistakes and fails, a God who can take a person as bad as they are and say, just because on the cross they decided they believed in me, that all of a sudden it turns around saved. I can't believe in a God like that. We try to let reason rule our mind to where we let our reason be our rational, being wise thinking, when in fact it's really foolishness. And this foolishness of the gospel message is in fact the wisdom that's being proclaimed. This foolish message that Paul talks about is simply this: we need a Savior. We don't need more knowledge. Paul goes and says in here, look at, where are the wise people? Where are the scholars? Where are the philosophers of the age? All these people who said we're going to have a better world, a better life, that through our own development as human beings, we're going to arrive to some perfect world, some paradise. It's like, come on, man. Where is it? It seems just as bad as it was before. Our effort to overcome sin is not succeeding. I don't know about you. Maybe I'm speaking to myself. Man, every day I'm thinking, God, I'm a screw up. How can I not be able to recognize the fact that the only way that I can be able to be saved is to need someone else. Romans 3:23 says, all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. We are in need of a Savior, and this crucified Christ is the Savior for us. This is what the gospel says. The world wisdom says we can save ourselves, but we can't. The world's grace says point to there is a point where we're too far gone, but we're not. God's I love this expression. I read it in a Philip Yancey book. He says, God's grace is like a river flowing down a mountain that is seeking the lowest point. And so it doesn't matter what point you are at, how low you are, because the reality is grace is like gravity. It flows down. And there is not a point where it says, oh, that's too low. That's the beauty of the gospel that's being described, is the fact that we never hit a low point with God. And yet the world's wisdom would say, oh yeah, you do. And so it becomes a message of foolishness from the eyes of the world. But also, tied in that is a foolish life, that it's kind of, not only is this a message of grace and of the cross, but then it's this foolish life that Paul describes as being called and to live purposeful in our life. Paul stresses in here, in this particular passage, and of course you go out and you see it in other areas as well, that he says in here, verse 24, think about who you were when you were called. Nowhere in here does Paul talk about it in this idea of that we figured it out or we see God. But in fact, in verse 21, he says that God was pleased through the foolishness of what was preached. That's not, if you were to go into the original language, he's not saying God was pleased the way they were preaching the gospel message. What he's saying is God was pleased to do this. It was in his own good pleasure that he decided, this is the way that I want the gospel to be communicated. This is the message of the cross and of grace that I want to be able to come across. It was in God's own good pleasure in the way that he communicated this. In verse 26, it says, we are chosen, but God chose the foolish things of the world. God chose the weak things of the world. He chose the lowly things of the world. He didn't sit and think that, Okay, is this the best I got? Okay, well, I guess I'll choose one. No. God had all that he could have chose. He could have chose the great things of the world and the knowledgeable things of the world and said, he gravitated and said, no, this is what I choose. That's the foolishness of the gospel and the fact that we believe and we love a God that says, Mark, you're screwed up. Mark, you can't figure it out. Man, you're a sinner, like a sinner. But I love you, man. And I choose you. We must remember to be wise in our foolishness. That God chose us because of who we are, not because of who we will be. He didn't base it on some foreknowledge of, you know what, maybe by 2015, Mark's going to be like this. So if I invest in him now, eventually he'll be there. This passage describes totally the opposite. He's attracted to those who are of no value to anybody else. This passage here, it's important to understand. He didn't choose those who appeared to be foolish. In other words, like they were misunderstanding. Or those who appeared to be nothing. Or those who appeared to be lowly. He chose the foolish. He chose the nothing. He chose the lowly. He chose the people that all of society said they are a scrap heap waste of people. They are of no value to our society. And if we could figure out a way to get rid of them, we would. Those are the people that God was drawn to. God, if you look at the lineage of Jesus, I mean, that alone in of itself, these are the people that are of the line of Jesus. That God, in those, there's a murderer, there's a prostitute. I mean, you could go on down the list. There's a bunch of whiners. There's just all kinds of people in that list of people that God are rejects all along the way that God says, hey, this is the perfect DNA of what I'm looking for. That's the foolishness of wisdom of the gospel, is that God would call us based on who we are right now. There's a great story. You don't have time to go through it, but the story of Gideon, if you've ever read it, Judges 6 through 7 or 8. Gideon ended up being a great story, but it didn't start out looking that way. So if you look in the story of Gideon, I'll just quickly do it. In chapter 6, verse 12, an angel of the Lord approaches Gideon. He's in threshing. They're under oppression of being attacked by the Midianites, and marauders would come in and steal their land and steal their possessions and steal their crops. So when they harvested, they would do it in hiding. And so here was Gideon. He was threshing wheat and stuff. An angel comes up to Gideon and he says, hey, hello, mighty warrior. He's thinking, what? Are you talking to me? He says, yeah, mighty warrior. God is with you. And Gideon responds too, but he's saying in verse 13 and 14, he says, well, if God is with us, then it doesn't make sense. Look at we're God's people. Look at the oppression we're experiencing. Look at the suffering that's going on. How can God be with us? It doesn't make sense. That's foolish thinking. Angel says, no, God is with you. And so he says, go out because I'm going to use you to save the Israelites. And again, he's thinking, whoa, wait. You might not be up to speed here, God or angel or whatever you are. But I'm in the weakest clan of all of Israel's people. I mean, we're the low ones. And not to mention, I'm also the weakest in my whole family. I mean, I'm the runt of the litter. I'm the one that, they always say is, man, he's so sensitive. That's me. No. You're a mighty warrior. God goes and gravitates to the one that everybody else would look at and say, there ain't no way this guy's saving us. We are sunk. And then just to make sure it's safe, if you go on with the story in the next chapter, is when they actually go to battle. And it's a great story. If you haven't heard it, you got to read it. So here's Midianites are coming in to destroy Israel. 165,000 of them ready to go to battle, prepared for battle. And these are just threshing wheat. They got nothing. They got some warriors. They're family members. They fight, these Israelites. But so they gather an army to go fight them. They got about 30,000.